The scent of leather and bourbon permeates the air as I run the cloth over the surface of Alexander Montague's mahogany desk, my movements precise and quiet, because quiet is how I survive in this house. It is nearly midnight, and the mansion has settled into its nighttime stillness, the kind of silence that feels thick and watchful. And I should have finished this room an hour ago, but Mrs. Whitmore asked me to stay late, and when the head housekeeper asks, it is really the master of the house commanding through her. My hands move over the polished wood in careful circles, erasing fingerprints and dust, erasing any evidence that this room is used by human hands at all, and I am so focused on my task that I do not notice him until my skin prickles with awareness. He is standing in the doorway, Alexander Montague, my employer. The man whose name is whispered in the city with equal parts fear and respect, though I suspect the fear outweighs everything else. I can feel his eyes on me before I turn, that particular weight of being observed, being studied, and when I finally glance toward him, my breath catches in my throat the way it always does. He is tall and perfectly still, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and controlled power. And those eyes, steel gray and unreadable, are fixed on me with an intensity that makes my pulse stutter. I do not know how long he has been watching. The thought sends ice through my veins. I straighten immediately, folding the cleaning cloth in my hands to keep them from trembling, and I lower my gaze because looking directly at him feels dangerous, like staring into the sun. Miss Sinclair. His voice is low and smooth, the kind of voice that could convince or threaten with equal ease. You will stay an additional hour tonight. It is not a question. It is never a question with men like him. Yes, sir, I reply, my voice steadier than I feel. And I wonder what I have done wrong. What mistake I have made that requires his personal attention at this hour. My mind races through the past weeks, searching for errors, for anything that might have drawn his focus, because being noticed by Alexander Montague is not a good thing for someone like me. I need this job. I need it more than I need air, more than I need sleep, more than I need pride or dignity, or any of the things I surrendered the day I walked through the servants' entrance of this mansion. The pay is better than anywhere else in the city, and it comes with discretion, with employers who do not ask questions about my life outside these walls, and I cannot afford to lose it. I cannot afford anything going wrong. He continues to watch me for another long moment, his expression revealing nothing, and then he simply turns and walks away, his footsteps silent on the Persian rug in the hallway. I release a breath I did not know I was holding. My hands are shaking now, and I press them flat against the cool surface of the desk, willing my heart to slow, willing the fear to subside. I finish cleaning the study with meticulous care, hyper-aware that he might return, that he might still be watching from somewhere I cannot see. When the hour is finally up, I gather my supplies and make my way through the dimly lit corridors to the servants' exit, my bag clutched against my side. The night air hits my face as I step outside, cool and clean after the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion, and I walk quickly toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. I do not look back. I never look back. But if I had, I might have seen the black car pulling out from the private garage, its headlights off, following at a careful distance as I disappear into the city streets. I might have seen Alexander Montague behind the wheel, his hands tight on the leather steering wheel, his eyes tracking my every movement. I might have seen him follow me all the way to the rundown apartment building on the east side, might have seen him park across the street and watch as I climb the steps to the 3rd floor. But I see none of this. I am thinking only of getting home, of the person waiting for me there, of the secret I guard more carefully than anything else in my life. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The apartment door opens before I can turn my key and Mrs. Chen from next door appears, her weathered face creasing into a smile that does not quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She stayed late again, I say quietly. guilt twisting in my chest. And the elderly woman waves away my apology as she always does, her fingers gentle on my arm. Sophie is sleeping, she tells me in her accented English. Ate all her dinner, did her breathing exercises like a good girl. I press money into Mrs. Chen's hand, more than we agreed upon because she never asks for enough. And she protests but takes it anyway because she needs it almost as much as I do. The door closes behind her, and I am finally alone in the dim silence of my tiny apartment. This space that consists of one bedroom barely big enough for the twin bed Sophie and I share, a kitchenette with a stove that works only 2 of its 4 burners, a bathroom where the tiles are cracked and water-stained, and this main room that serves as living area and dining space, and my makeshift office where bills pile up like accusations. I move quietly to the bedroom doorway and look at my daughter, her blonde hair fanned across the pillow, her small chest rising and falling with breaths that sometimes sound too labored, too strained, and the love that floods through me is so fierce it borders on pain. This is why I endure Alexander Montague's scrutiny, why I clean his mansion until my hands are raw, why I keep my head down and my mouth shut. Sophie is 6 years old, and she is my entire world, and she has a condition that requires constant medication, regular treatments, doctor visits that cost more than I make in a month. I left her father 4 years ago when his drinking became dangerous and his hands became weapons, took my baby girl and ran with nothing but a bag of clothes and a determination to survive. And I have been surviving ever since, barely, desperately, with a single-minded focus that leaves no room for anything else. I learned quickly that employers like the Montagues do not want maids with complications, do not want to hear about sick children or custody arrangements or the messy realities of poverty. So I became Eleanor Sinclair, the invisible servant, the woman with no past and no ties and no needs beyond her paycheck. I kiss Sophie's forehead, her skin warm beneath my lips, and move back into the main room where the stack of medical bills waits on the counter next to the past due notice for rent. The numbers blur together, impossible sums that I cannot pay, and I sink into the thrift store chair by the window and press my fingers to my temples. Across the street, hidden in shadow, Alexander Montague sits in his car and watches my silhouette in the window, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind churning with questions he cannot answer. He tells himself this is due diligence, that he is simply ensuring his employee is trustworthy, that he has every right to know where his staff goes and what they do, but the justification feels hollow even to him. He has run background checks, has vetted every person who works in his home with ruthless thoroughness, and Eleanor Sinclair came back clean, unremarkably so, a woman with no criminal record and no family and no digital footprint whatsoever. It should satisfy him, but instead it intensifies his need to know more, to understand why she moves through his house like a ghost, why her eyes hold such carefully concealed desperation, why he cannot stop thinking about the curve of her neck when she bends over her work, or the way her hands move with such precise grace. Something shifts in his chest as he watches her, something unfamiliar and uncomfortable, and he does not have a name for it, but it feels dangerously close to protectiveness, to possession, to a kind of longing he thought he had buried with his humanity years ago. He starts the engine and pulls away from the curb, telling himself this surveillance ends now, that he will not follow her again, that his interest in Eleanor Sinclair is merely curiosity and nothing more. The lie tastes bitter, but he repeats it anyway as he drives through the empty streets toward his mansion on the hill, toward the fortress he built to keep the world at bay. 3 days have passed since Alexander told himself he would stop following Eleanor Sinclair, and he has broken that promise every single night, watching her leave the mansion and trailing her through the city streets like a shadow she cannot shake. And he knows this behavior crosses lines he once thought himself incapable of crossing, but he cannot seem to stop, cannot seem to silence the need to know where she goes, and whether she arrives safely, and what secrets she guards so carefully behind those guarded eyes. I am being watched. The certainty settles into my bones as I polish the collection of crystal decanters in the drawing room, my reflection fragmented across their surfaces, distorted and multiplied. It is a ridiculous thought. Paranoia born of exhaustion and stress. Because who would waste time watching someone as insignificant as me? But the sensation persists, crawling up my spine whenever I walk to the bus stop or turn down my street. I shake it off and focus on my work, on keeping my hands steady and my mind blank. Alexander is in his office with Thomas Lennox, his right-hand man and enforcer, the kind of man whose very presence suggests violence held in careful check, and I can hear the low rumble of their voices through the heavy door as I work nearby. Thomas is saying something about territory and threats and a name that sounds like Redmond, his tone urgent in a way that suggests whatever business they discuss is the kind that ends in blood. And I keep my head down because hearing too much in this house is dangerous. When Thomas emerges, his eyes sweep over me with the clinical assessment of a man trained to identify threats and find me wanting, which is exactly what I need. Alexander appears in the doorway moments later, and his gaze finds me immediately. That same intense focus that makes my pulse jump, and I wonder if he can hear the way my heart speeds when he looks at me like that. Like I am a puzzle he is determined to solve. I reach for a particularly elaborate vase on the high shelf, my fingers closing around the delicate porcelain, and somehow it slips, tumbling through the air in what feels like slow motion before shattering against the hardwood floor in an explosion of fragments and sound. The crash seems impossibly loud in the quiet house. I drop to my knees instantly, my hands shaking as I reach for the pieces, apologies already spilling from my lips, and I am calculating how many weeks of salary this will cost me, whether I can negotiate a payment plan, whether this mistake will be the one that costs me everything. Are you hurt? His voice comes from directly above me, and I jerk my head up to find Alexander crouching beside me, his hand reaching for mine, and the question in his tone is so unexpected that I can only stare. He is checking my fingers for cuts with a gentleness that seems impossible from a man like him, his touch careful and warm, and I realize I am holding my breath. I am fine, I manage, pulling my hand back. I am so sorry, sir. I will pay for the vase. You can take it from my wages, whatever it costs. He waves this away as if the destroyed object worth more than I make in 6 months means nothing. Leave it, he says. Someone else will clean this up. And then he does something that stops my heart entirely. He asks, "Do you live alone, Miss Sinclair? Is your neighborhood safe? Do you feel secure when you walk home at night?" The questions are too personal, too specific, crossing boundaries that should exist between employer and employee. And I scramble for answers that will satisfy without revealing anything real. "I live in a perfectly adequate area, sir," I reply carefully. "I have never had any problems." His eyes search mine, and I can see he does not believe me, can see that he wants to push further. But after a long moment, he simply nods and stands, offering me his hand. I take it because refusing would be more suspicious than accepting, and his grip is strong and steady as he pulls me to my feet. "Be careful," he tells me, and I cannot tell if he means with the crystal or with something else entirely. That evening, as I leave through the servants' entrance, the sensation of being watched intensifies, and I hurry toward the bus stop, my bag clutched tight against my side. And 3 blocks away, Alexander sits in his car and watches me walk, telling himself this is about her safety, about ensuring she reaches home without incident, about anything other than the truth, which is that he simply cannot stay away. I make a detour to the pharmacy, because Sophie's prescription needs refilling, and I count the bills in my wallet twice to make sure I have enough. And across the street, Alexander watches me emerge with a small white bag, watches me check the contents with the focused attention of someone for whom every penny matters. And he sees me purchase children's medicine, and the final piece clicks into place. Alexander Montague sits in his private office long after Eleanor has left for the evening, the brandy in his glass untouched as he stares at the computer screen before him, and the background check results tell him almost nothing, which is precisely what troubles him most. Eleanor Sinclair has no social media presence, no digital footprint beyond the most basic records, no family listed anywhere in the databases his people can access. And this absence of information feels deliberate, like someone who has carefully erased herself from the world. He tells himself this investigation is necessary, that anyone working in his home must be vetted thoroughly, that this has nothing to do with the way his chest tightens when she walks into a room, or the fact that he has memorized the exact shade of her blonde hair in afternoon light. A security risk, he repeats to himself. That is all this is, and the lie tastes bitter even in his own mind. That night he follows her again, and this time his surveillance takes him somewhere unexpected, to a small playground 3 blocks from her apartment building, where the streetlights cast pools of amber across worn equipment. And he watches from his car as Eleanor emerges from the shadows with a small blonde child, whose hand she holds with fierce protectiveness. The little girl cannot be more than 6 years old, and the resemblance is unmistakable in the curve of her cheek and the color of her hair, and Alexander feels something fundamental shift in his understanding as he watches Eleanor lift the child onto a swing and push her gently, her entire demeanor transformed. This is not the quiet, fearful maid who moves through his mansion like a ghost, but a woman alive with warmth and laughter, her face soft with love as she watches her daughter pump her legs and fly higher, and the sound of the child's delighted giggles carries across the empty playground like music. Eleanor has a daughter she has been hiding, a secret she has guarded with such desperation that she erased herself from all records, and Alexander understands in that moment the weight of what he has witnessed, the trust she has placed in no one, the lengths she has gone to protect this small, precious life. Something cracks open in his chest, something he thought had calcified years ago when he buried his sister Isabella after her murder by a rival family, when he vowed never to care for anyone again, because caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant loss. He watches Eleanor catch her daughter at the bottom of the slide and spin her around, both of them laughing, and he sees in her fierce protectiveness an echo of the man he used to be before violence became his language and power became his prison. The little girl says something, and Eleanor kneels down to her level, smoothing blonde hair back from a small face, and even from this distance, Alexander can see the devotion in every gesture, the way she would burn the world down to keep this child safe. He sits with this knowledge for a long time after they leave the playground, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind churning with implications and questions, and a feeling he cannot name that feels dangerously close to tenderness. When he finally returns to his mansion, he summons Thomas and orders a complete investigation into Eleanor Sinclair's circumstances, and by morning, he has the full picture spread across his desk in stark financial documents and medical records. Eleanor is drowning in medical debt that totals more than she will earn in 5 years. Her daughter Sophie has a chronic respiratory condition requiring constant medication and regular treatments, and every penny Eleanor makes goes toward keeping her child alive while she lives on the edge of homelessness and hunger. Alexander reads through the reports twice, his jaw tight, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest that feels like the desire to protect rather than control, to give rather than take, to use his considerable resources for something other than building his empire or destroying his enemies. He thinks of Isabella, who he failed to save, of the little girl in the playground who carries the same vulnerability, of Eleanor who sacrifices everything, including her own dignity, to keep her daughter safe, and he makes a decision that will change everything. Alexander arranges the encounter with careful precision the following morning, intercepting me as I carry linens toward the guest wing, his voice stopping me mid-step when he asks if I have time to discuss an additional opportunity. My heart lurches because additional opportunity could mean anything in a house like this. Could mean he knows. Could mean the end of everything. But I turn and nod, because refusing him is not an option I possess. He leads me to his personal library, a room I have only glimpsed through open doorways, all dark wood and leather, and the scent of old books mixed with his cologne, and he gestures for me to sit in one of the chairs near the fireplace while he remains standing, his body language controlled but somehow restless. "I need someone to organize this collection," he says, indicating the floor-to-ceiling shelves that hold what must be thousands of volumes. It is specialized work, requires care and attention to detail, someone I can trust with valuable first editions. The pay would be substantially higher than your current rate, an additional $800 per week. The number steals my breath, because $800 per week means Sophie's medication covered with money left over, means security I have not felt in years, means something that feels too good to be true. "Why me?" I ask, because suspicion is a survival skill I have learned well, and I watch his face carefully for the truth beneath whatever answer he gives. "You are meticulous," he replies. "You notice details others miss. You care about your work in a way that is rare." His eyes hold mine, and I see something there that makes my pulse quicken for reasons that have nothing to do with fear. I accept because I am desperate, and because refusing would raise questions I cannot afford. And so we begin that very afternoon, Alexander showing me his organizational system while I stand close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to notice the precise way his hands handle each book, close enough to be dangerously aware of him in ways I should not be. The days that follow establish a new pattern where I spend hours in the library while he works at the desk near the window, the silence between us comfortable in a way that surprises me. And sometimes he asks me questions that seem casual but feel weighted, questions about what I think of certain authors or whether I prefer the city or the countryside, questions that never quite cross the line into truly personal territory, but circle it like he is mapping boundaries. I find myself watching him when I think he is absorbed in his work, noticing the way he rubs his temples when he is tired, the rare small smile when he reads something that pleases him, the unexpected gentleness with which he handles a damaged binding. He is not what I expected, not entirely, and that realization is more frightening than if he had remained simply the dangerous man I serve. On the fourth afternoon, I reach for a volume on the upper shelf at the exact moment he does, and our hands collide, his fingers warm and strong against mine, and the air between us suddenly charges with awareness so intense, I forget to breathe. We both freeze, neither pulling away, and I can feel my heart hammering against my ribs as his thumb brushes across my knuckles in what might be accident or might be intention. He withdraws first, his jaw tight with visible control, and I clutch the book to my chest like a shield, while my mind races with confusion because I should not feel this pull toward him, should not notice the way his eyes darken when he looks at me, should not want to close the distance between us, and discover if his control would shatter under my touch. The sensation of being watched has intensified over the past week until my skin prickles with constant awareness, until I catch myself glancing over my shoulder on every street corner. And tonight, I decide to test whether my paranoia has basis in reality or if fear has finally broken something fundamental in my mind. I leave the mansion at my usual time, but instead of taking my normal route, I turn left instead of right, weaving through streets I rarely use, doubling back twice, leading whatever shadow might be following me on a path that will reveal itself if it exists. My heart hammers against my ribs as I move through the evening crowds, past shop windows glowing gold in the dusk, and I feel him there even though I cannot see him. Feel the weight of observation like hands on my shoulders. The anger builds with each block I walk, hot and bright and stronger than fear, because if he is following me, then everything in the library was a lie. The careful questions and gentle touches were manipulation, and I am done being a victim in my own life. I lead him into a narrow alley between two restaurants where the smell of garlic and grease hangs thick in the air, and then I spin around to face the entrance. My hands shaking but my voice steady when Alexander Montague steps into view, and I demand to know how long he has been stalking me and why. He stops mid-step, genuine surprise crossing his features, And for a moment, we stand there in the gathering dark while my chest heaves and his jaw tightens. I ask if this is some kind of game to him, if watching his employees outside of work is how he entertains himself, and the fear that has governed my life transforms into fury that tastes like freedom. He admits it, just says, "Yes, I have been following you," his voice low and rough. And when I ask why, he says he was concerned for my safety in that neighborhood, but the answer feels incomplete, feels like truth wrapped around something deeper. I tell him I am quitting effective immediately, that I will not work for someone who stalks me through the streets, and he takes a step closer, his presence filling the alley, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that steals my breath despite my anger. He knows about Sophie, he says, and the world stops, time stretching into something viscous and terrible as those 4 words destroy everything I have built. I feel tears burn my eyes, and I hear myself begging, actually begging him not to fire me, promising I will do anything, work any hours, accept any conditions if he just lets me keep this job because Sophie needs her medication and I have nowhere else to go. His expression shifts into something I cannot read, and he says he does not want to fire me. He wants to help me, and I do not understand, cannot process what help means in this context. I demand to know what he wants from me, what price his help carries, and he steps closer still, close enough that I can see the conflict in his steel-gray eyes, and his voice drops to almost a whisper when he says he does not want to hurt me. He wants to protect me, and I am searching his face for the deception when the black car pulls up at the alley entrance and everything changes. 2 men emerge, and one of them calls out Alexander's name with recognition and malice, and I see his entire body tense before he moves, pushing me behind him with one arm while his other hand goes to his jacket. The first gunshot cracks through the air like thunder, and Alexander is pulling me into a run, his hand locked around my wrist, dragging me deeper into the alley while bullets spark off brick behind us, and I am too terrified to even scream. We run through darkness that smells of rotting garbage and rain-soaked concrete, his hand an iron grip around my wrist pulling me forward, while my lungs burn and my legs scream, and behind us I hear shouts and the terrible crack of more gunshots ricocheting off metal dumpsters. Alexander yanks me left into a narrow passage between buildings, so tight our shoulders brush brick on both sides, and then we are through into a courtyard littered with broken pallets, and he is scanning desperately for escape routes while my heart hammers so hard I think it might shatter my ribs. "There," he says, pointing to a door hanging half off its hinges in what looks like an abandoned warehouse, and we are inside before I can process the decision, plunging into blackness that swallows us whole while he pulls me behind a stack of crates, and suddenly we are still, pressed together in the dark with his arm wrapped around my waist and his other hand covering my mouth gently as footsteps pound past outside. We stay frozen like that for endless seconds, his chest rising and falling against my back, his breath hot against my ear, and I can feel every point where our bodies connect burning through my clothes like brands. The footsteps fade and he slowly removes his hand from my mouth, but does not release me, and I spin in his arms to face him, even though I can barely see his features in the shadows, my terror transforming into fury as I demand to know what the hell just happened and why men are shooting at us in the street. His voice is low and rough when he explains. Rival organization, ongoing territorial dispute. They recognized him and saw an opportunity. Wrong place, wrong time. But his eyes tell me there is more to it. Tell me this is not coincidence. And the realization crashes over me like ice water that they targeted him while he was with me, following me, that I have been pulled into his dangerous world because of his obsession. The anger and fear collide in my chest as I shove against him and accuse him of this, of making me a target, of dragging me into gang wars and violence because he could not stay away, and his control fractures like glass shattering as he admits it, admits he could not stop himself from following me, from watching me, from needing to be near me even when he knew it was dangerous and wrong. His confession hangs in the dark between us, raw and vulnerable, and I should pull away, should run, should do anything except stand here feeling my own walls begin to crack under the weight of his honesty. His phone buzzes and he pulls it out, the screen illuminating his face in harsh blue light as he reads a message from Thomas, saying the area is secured. And where is he? We need to leave, Alexander says. And when we emerge back onto the street, there is a black car waiting with Thomas at the wheel, looking grim and bloodied. And Alexander insists on taking me home himself, despite my protests that I can take the bus like always. In his car, the leather seats are soft as butter, and the interior smells like expensive cologne, and the class divide between us has never been more apparent as we sit in silence, heavy with everything unspoken. He asks about Sophie's condition, reveals he knows about the medical bills, the specific treatments, the costs that are drowning me, and my helpless anger rises again because he has investigated every corner of my life, invaded every privacy I thought I had. He offers again to help, and I refuse again because accepting feels like surrender, feels like admitting I cannot survive without him. And we arrive at my building where he insists on walking me up despite my protests. At my door with Sophie sleeping inside, and the hallway light flickering overhead, he looks at me with barely restrained emotion, and I see hunger there, and possessiveness, and something that might be tenderness, and I do not know which terrifies me more. When the door opens just a crack, I glimpse inside and see the reality of Eleanor's life laid bare before me. The tiny apartment with its peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture that looks held together by hope more than structural integrity. A small kitchen visible beyond, with a single bare bulb, casting harsh light over a table piled with papers that I know without seeing are medical bills and past due notices. She tells me to leave, her voice carrying less conviction than her words suggest. And I know I should turn around and walk away, give her the space she deserves. But instead, I hear myself asking if I can see Sophie, if I can meet the child I have watched from car windows and across playgrounds, the little girl who has somehow become tangled up in whatever this obsession has become. Eleanor's entire body goes rigid, and she steps into the doorway blocking my view inside, her protective instinct flaring bright and fierce in her eyes. And she tells me absolutely not. Tells me Sophie is asleep, and I have no right to ask. And she is correct on both counts, but the refusal still feels like a blade between my ribs. I do not push because I have already violated enough boundaries tonight, have already dragged her into my world of violence and bullets, so I simply nod and step back. But I tell her we need to talk properly tomorrow, need to discuss what happens next, because everything has changed whether we want it to or not. Victor Redmond knows she is connected to me now. His men saw us together, and that makes her a target. Makes her and Sophie vulnerabilities that my enemies will not hesitate to exploit, and I am arranging protection for her whether she agrees or not, because I cannot undo tonight, but I can prevent worse from happening. Her face drains of color as the implications crash over her, and she says she never wanted this, never wanted danger or protection or any connection to my world. And the guilt is a living thing in my chest, because she is right. I brought this to her door with my selfish inability to stay away. But the possessiveness in my blood will not be denied, and I tell her plainly that I am not abandoning her now, not leaving her and Sophie exposed because of choices I made. And she is trapped between fear and something else I see flickering in her eyes. Something that looks dangerously like the same pull I feel dragging me toward her against all reason. I force myself to turn away, to walk down the hallway with its flickering fluorescent lights and stained carpet, and I do not look back even though every instinct screams at me to stay, to guard her door all night, to never let her out of my sight again. She checks on Sophie the moment I am gone. I know she does, looking at her daughter and realizing that everything has changed in the space of a single evening. Morning comes, and at the mansion the staff notices immediately that something has shifted, the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm, and Mrs. Whitmore approaches Eleanor with motherly concern asking if something happened, if she is all right. But Eleanor cannot explain the complexity of what she is caught in, cannot articulate how her employer stalked her and saved her and terrified her all in one night. I summon her to my office mid-morning and she comes with her spine straight and her chin lifted, defiant even in her fear, and I lay out my proposal with the clinical precision I use in business negotiations, even though my hands want to shake. I will pay for all of Sophie's medical care, every treatment and medication and specialist appointment, will provide better housing in a secure building, will ensure their safety with professional protection, and in exchange, she continues working for me, stays close, lets me shield her from the consequences of my obsession. She searches my face for the catch, for the ulterior motive she knows must exist, and I give her honesty because she deserves at least that much. Tell her I want her, but I will not force anything. The help is unconditional, but I will not pretend my interest is purely altruistic. Her mind races behind those eyes, and I watch the war play out across her features. Pride battling desperation, fear wrestling with something that might be hope, and she asks for time to think, voice barely steady. I agree because I have to, because forcing her hand now would destroy whatever fragile thing is building between us, but I warn her that Victor's threat is real and immediate, and time is a luxury she may not have. She leaves my office without looking back, and I watch her go, watch the rigid set of her shoulders and the way her hands tremble slightly at her sides, and I know with absolute certainty that I am already too far gone to ever let her walk away. The next 24 hours stretch like an eternity while I turn Alexander's offer over in my mind, examining it from every angle for hidden traps and ulterior motives. Pride warring with the brutal pragmatism that comes from years of choosing between rent and food, between medicine and electricity. I take Sophie to her doctor appointment the following afternoon, sitting in the sterile waiting room with its faded children's books and cheerful posters that feel like mockery. And when Dr. Morrison calls us back, her expression is kind but serious, as she explains that Sophie's latest tests show the current medication is losing effectiveness, that we need to start a new treatment protocol immediately. And the cost she quotes makes my vision swim and my stomach drop like I have been pushed off a cliff. I nod mechanically and say I will figure it out, the same lie I have told a dozen times before, but this time the numbers are impossible, beyond even my most desperate calculations, and Sophie looks up at me with those trusting blue eyes asking if everything is okay, and I smile and tell her yes, because what else can I do? We walk home slowly, Sophie chattering about a butterfly she saw and can she have a snack when we get there. And I hold her small hand in mine, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing down on my shoulders. Pride screaming at me to find another way, while cold reality whispers that there is no other way. Not anymore. We are half a block from the mansion when the car pulls up beside us. Black and sleek and predatory, and a man gets out who I recognize from that terrible night when bullets flew and Alexander's world reached out to swallow me whole. He walks toward us with deliberate slowness, and his smile is all teeth and cruelty as he delivers his message in a voice pitched low and conversational. Tells me that Mr. Redmond is a reasonable man who simply wants me to understand that I should distance myself from Alexander Montague immediately and permanently, that continued association would be unfortunate for everyone involved, and his eyes slide to Sophie when he says everyone, and the threat is crystal clear, and my terror transforms instantly to something fiercer and more dangerous than fear. I pull Sophie behind me, my body a shield, and something in my expression makes him laugh as he gets back in the car, job done, and they drive away, leaving me shaking on the sidewalk with my daughter asking why I look scared. I run then, pulling Sophie along, not toward the bus stop and our apartment but back toward the mansion, through the service entrance and up the stairs, asking a startled maid where Alexander is, and not waiting for an answer before I am pushing open his office door without knocking, and he looks up from his desk with surprise that shifts immediately to alarm when he sees my face. I break down and tell him everything, the words tumbling out about the man and the threat and Sophie and the fear that is eating me alive, and Alexander's expression goes utterly cold in a way that is somehow more terrifying than rage, controlled and deadly and absolute. He makes calls immediately, his voice clipped and commanding as he mobilizes resources I cannot begin to imagine, and I watch the full extent of his power and danger unfold before me as men report in and plans form, and the criminal empire he commands snaps into lethal focus. He tells me that Sophie and I are being moved to the mansion tonight, that we are not safe anywhere else, and I protest weakly that we cannot just uproot our lives, but he cuts me off with a look that brooks no argument, tells me his men are already en route to my apartment to pack our essential belongings, and Thomas is personally bringing Sophie here within the hour. Everything happens with dizzying speed, decisions made and executed before I can process them. And when Thomas arrives carrying my sleepy, confused daughter, I watch this dangerous enforcer handle her with surprising gentleness, as Sophie stares around the mansion entrance hall, with wide eyes asking if this is a palace. Alexander approaches slowly, crouching down to Sophie's level, and his entire demeanor transforms as he introduces himself and asks her name, his voice gentle and patient, while my daughter studies him with a child's uncanny perception before announcing that he has kind eyes and offering him her hand to shake. He takes it carefully, solemnly, and something in my chest cracks open as I see this powerful, feared man utterly undone by a 6-year-old's trust. That night in a guest suite, more luxurious than anywhere I have ever lived, I put Sophie to bed in sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, overwhelmed by how drastically everything has shifted in the space of hours, and Alexander appears at the door asking quietly if he can come in. We step into the hallway outside Sophie's room, leaving the door cracked so I can hear if she wakes, and the silence between us feels heavy with unspoken words, and the weight of everything that has happened in such a short time. I thank him, my voice thick with emotions I cannot fully name, gratitude and fear, and something deeper that I am not ready to examine. And he leans against the wall watching me with those steel-gray eyes that seem to see straight through every defense I have ever constructed. He tells me about his sister then, the words coming slowly as though each one costs him something, about a girl 8 years younger who looked up to him with absolute trust, who believed he could protect her from anything, and how she died when he was 22 and still building his empire, caught in crossfire meant for him, bleeding out in his arms while he screamed for help that came too late. The pain in his voice is raw and ancient, a wound that never healed, and he says that watching me with Sophie tonight brought it all back, the fierce protectiveness, the understanding that there is nothing more important than keeping the people we love safe, and his use of that word love hangs in the air between us, though I do not know if he means his sister or something else entirely. My hand reaches for his without conscious thought, my fingers finding his in the dim light of the hallway, and the touch is electric, but also grounding, connecting us in shared grief and understanding, because I know what it is to be terrified of losing the person who matters most. He looks down at our joined hands, and his thumb traces small circles on my palm, the gesture tender and intimate, and neither of us pulls away, even though we probably should. Even though every rule of employer and employee has been shattered beyond recognition. He tells me he will keep us safe, his voice low and fervent, a vow that sounds like something sacred. And I believe him, because what other choice do I have? Because the alternative is unthinkable, and because something in his eyes makes me want to trust him, despite every logical reason not to. I ask him why he is doing this, really doing this. And he looks at me for a long moment before admitting he does not fully understand it himself. That from the first night he followed me home, he has been unable to stop thinking about me. That watching me has become an obsession he cannot rationalize or control, and the honesty in his confession is startling and frightening, and somehow exactly what I needed to hear. The connection between us feels tangible in this moment, fragile but real, built on shared vulnerability and the strange intimacy of crisis, and when he finally pulls his hand away and tells me to get some rest, that tomorrow will bring its own challenges, I feel the loss of his touch like a physical ache. He walks away down the hallway and I stand there watching until he disappears around the corner, my heart racing and my mind spinning with the impossible complexity of what is happening between us. And I know with absolute certainty that nothing will ever be simple again, but somehow that feels less terrifying than it should. The days that follow take on a strange new rhythm as Sophie and I settle into life in the mansion, our belongings unpacked in the guest suite that feels more like a luxury hotel than temporary shelter, and I watch Alexander transform before my eyes as he interacts with my daughter, crouching down to answer her endless questions with patience I never knew he possessed, listening intently as she explains the rules of some elaborate game involving stuffed animals and castles. Mrs. Whitmore catches my eye one morning and gives me a look that is equal parts knowing and approving. And I realize the entire household staff has noticed the shift, the way Alexander's gaze follows me through rooms, the way he finds excuses to check on us throughout the day, and the gossip must be spreading through the mansion like wildfire, though no one dares mention it directly. Sophie's treatments begin with the best specialists in the city, doctors who actually take time to explain things and whose offices do not smell like desperation and deferred maintenance. And watching my daughter receive care without the constant weight of impossible debt crushing my chest makes me understand just how much fear I have been carrying for so long. The tension in the house builds as Victor's threats escalate according to fragments of conversation I overhear. Thomas arriving at odd hours with reports delivered in low, urgent tones, and Alexander grows increasingly occupied with strategy sessions and phone calls conducted in languages I do not speak, his expression hardening into the dangerous mask I remember from my early days working here. I see him late one night as I am unable to sleep, pacing the hallways of this enormous house, and I find him in his study surrounded by papers and maps, exhaustion carved into every line of his face, shoulders bowed under burdens I cannot begin to fathom. I bring him coffee without asking if he wants it, a small domestic gesture that feels absurdly normal given the circumstances, and he looks up at me with surprise that softens into something warmer as I set the cup on his desk, and instead of leaving, I find myself staying, drawn by the vulnerability I see in his unguarded moment. We talk then, really talk for the first time without fear or formality standing between us, and he tells me about building his empire from nothing, about the violence he has committed and witnessed, about the isolation of power and the weight of being responsible for so many lives, and his honesty is raw and unflinching as though he needs me to see the worst of him before anything else can happen. I share my own story in return, the whole truth of it, about Sophie's father who disappeared the moment my pregnancy test came back positive, about the years of working multiple jobs and choosing between medicine and food, about the shame of failing to provide adequately for my child despite doing everything I possibly could, and my voice cracks on the admission that I have felt like a failure as a mother every single day for 6 years. Alexander reaches across the desk and touches my face, his palm warm against my cheek, and he tells me I am the strongest person he has ever met, that my daughter is lucky to have me, and the sincerity in his eyes makes my breath catch and my carefully constructed walls tremble. He asks permission with his gaze before leaning closer, and I do not pull away, cannot pull away, and when his lips meet mine, the kiss is tender and desperate simultaneously. Weeks of tension and unspoken longing finally breaking free as I kiss him back and surrender to what has been building between us since that first night he followed me home. The kiss deepens and his hands tangle in my hair and mine grip his shoulders as need rises hot and urgent between us. But then he pulls back, breathing hard and fighting visibly for control, and he tells me he will not take advantage of me while I am under his protection and in his debt. That he wants me to be free to choose without obligation or gratitude clouding my judgment. I protest that this is my choice, that I want this and want him, but he remains firm even as I can see the cost of his restraint, insisting we wait until the danger has passed, and I am truly free to decide without pressure or fear influencing me, and the nobility in his refusal only makes me want him more desperately. We part for the night both aching and unfulfilled, and I return to my suite where Sophie sleeps peacefully, unaware of the adult complexities swirling around her. But before I can fully process what happened, Thomas arrives with news that they have finally located Victor's main operation, and I watch Alexander's expression shift from the tender man who just kissed me to the cold, dangerous strategist preparing for war. And I know with sinking certainty that he is about to walk into terrible danger. The following week unfolds in a strange, suspended reality where time moves differently, measured in the rhythm of hospital machines and the quiet sounds of Alexander's breathing as he heals. And I refuse to leave his side despite his insistence that I should rest, that Sophie needs me. But Mrs. Whitmore has taken my daughter under her wing with a tenderness that speaks of grandmotherly instincts finally given an outlet. Sophie visits every afternoon after Thomas picks her up, her small arms full of drawings she has made in her beautiful new room, pictures of flowers and houses, and 3 stick figures she labels as Mommy and Alexander and me, and she chatters to him about everything and nothing, telling him about the cat she saw in the garden and the cookies Mrs. Whitmore taught her to make. And I watch him listening with complete attention, as though her words are the most important intelligence briefing he has ever received. He heals faster with us there. The doctors comment on his remarkable recovery, but I see the truth in his eyes when he watches Sophie laugh, or when his gaze finds mine across the room, that he is fighting to get better because he finally has something worth healing for. And the conversations we have in the quiet hours are about the future, about what happens now that Victor is gone, and the immediate danger has passed. He asks me what I want, truly want, his voice serious and searching, and I admit that I want to stay, but not as his maid, not as someone under his protection out of obligation. And we talk about the complexity of how we came together, the power imbalance that still exists, the unconventional path that brought us to this moment. Alexander surprises me by offering to set me up independently, a house of my own, financial security separate from him entirely, so that I can choose freely without any sense of debt or dependency clouding my judgment. And I refuse immediately because I am choosing now, choosing him with clear eyes and full knowledge of what that means. I tell him I want partnership, not protection, equality, not rescue, and he agrees to try, to let me stand beside him rather than behind him, and I see the relief in his expression, as though he was afraid I might accept his offer and walk away. We plan our first real date like nervous teenagers, and he takes me somewhere I never expected, to the neighborhood where he grew up before the violence and the empire, showing me the modest streets and the small house where his sister used to play, sharing pieces of his history that make him human rather than mythical. We walk through his past together, and I see the man beneath the reputation, the boy who wanted to protect his family and got lost somewhere along the way. And when he kisses me this time, it is different, passionate but also free, unbound by the constraints of protection and obligation that colored our first kiss. We return to the mansion, and the tension between us is undeniable and electric, and he asks again for my consent, for my certainty that this is what I want, and my affirmation is clear and unhesitating as I tell him, I want this, want him, want everything we can build together. The night we share is intimate and transformative, a physical consummation of everything that has been building between us. And the next morning when Sophie climbs into bed between us chattering about breakfast, I see her happiness at finding her mother happy, at having this man who treats her with such tenderness become a permanent fixture in our lives. But the external world still exists beyond the bubble we have created, and Alexander must decide what kind of man he will be going forward, what kind of empire he wants to lead. And I watch my influence become visible in his choices as he calls a meeting with his lieutenants and announces changes, a transition away from violence and toward legitimate business operations, not overnight, but a direction firmly chosen. He invites me to sit beside him during that meeting, not hidden away but acknowledged, and I see the surprise in the faces of men who have known him for years, but also a grudging respect as they accept that their boss has found something worth changing for, and we leave that room together with Sophie between us, a makeshift family that has somehow found solid ground. Months pass, and a new equilibrium settles over our lives, like the first snow that softens all the harsh edges. And I watch Sophie thriving in ways I never dared hope possible. Her treatment successful, and her health improving with each visit to the specialists, who no longer make me feel like a charity case, but instead treat my daughter with genuine care and attention. I have taken on a role managing some of Alexander's legitimate business ventures, discovering an aptitude for organization and strategy I never knew I possessed, finding my own power and my own place in his world rather than existing in the shadow of his protection, and the satisfaction of earning my position rather than being granted it as a gift makes all the difference to my sense of self. Alexander has stepped back from the violent side of his empire with deliberate intention, allowing Thomas to handle security matters while he transitions operations toward legal enterprises. And though I know the shadows of his past still linger in certain dealings, the direction we are moving is unmistakably toward the light. The mansion feels like a home now, rather than a workplace or a prison. Rooms that once intimidated me with their grandeur now familiar and comfortable, filled with Sophie's laughter and toys scattered across expensive rugs that no longer make me nervous about damage or mess. Our relationship deepens daily, moving beyond the initial passion and intensity to something more substantial and enduring, partnership built on mutual respect and genuine understanding, and we talk about the future with increasing frequency, about marriage and permanence, and the life we are building together. But my insecurities surface unexpectedly one evening when we attend a charity gala filled with people from Alexander's world. Women in designer gowns who grew up with wealth and education and easy confidence. And I find myself wondering if I truly belong here, or if I am playing dress-up in someone else's life. The class difference that seemed less important within the walls of our home looms large in this glittering ballroom, and when Alexander finds me hiding on a balcony, I confess my fears about whether I will ever be enough for his world, whether Sophie and I are an embarrassment he will eventually regret. His frustration is immediate and fierce as he tells me he does not care about any of that, never did, that I am worth more than every person in that room combined, but his words cannot quite penetrate the lifetime of feeling less than that has shaped my self-perception. We argue, really argue for the first time, about my self-worth and his inability to make me see myself as he does, and I walk away needing space to think, to breathe, to process the tangle of emotions choking me. I take Sophie to the park the next afternoon, the same small playground where Alexander first watched us from a distance, and I sit on the bench reflecting on how far we have come, how much has changed since those early days of fear and secrecy. Alexander appears, having followed us again but this time openly, walking up the path without pretense or apology, and he sits beside me watching Sophie play on the swings. We talk quietly about fear and worth and future, and then he turns to me with an expression so vulnerable it stops my breath, and he tells me he wants me forever, wants to give Sophie his name too, wants to make permanent and legal the family we have built from impossible circumstances. He has no ring, no elaborate plan, just honest words and steady eyes, and I find myself crying as I say yes, clear and certain, because this man who once terrified me has become the safest place I know. Sophie runs over, sensing something important, and we tell her together that Alexander wants to be her daddy for real, and her excitement is pure and joyful as she throws her arms around him, calling him daddy for the first time. And I watch this hardened, dangerous man come completely undone by a child's love, his eyes wet as he holds her close and promises to be the father she deserves. Wedding planning becomes a delicate negotiation between my desire for simplicity and Alexander's instinct to give me everything, every luxury and extravagance his wealth can provide. But we find compromise in an elegant ceremony that remains intimate and personal, rather than the society spectacle he could easily orchestrate. Mrs. Whitmore throws herself into preparations with an enthusiasm that makes me tearful, transforming the mansion gardens into something magical while maintaining the warmth that makes it feel like home, rather than a showcase, and Sophie takes her role as flower girl with a seriousness that is both adorable and touching as she practices walking slowly and tossing petals with great concentration. Alexander's remaining family appears in the days before the wedding, distant relatives who maintained careful separation from his criminal enterprises, and I feel their wariness immediately, the way their eyes assess me and find me wanting, their polite questions about my background loaded with judgment about class and worthiness. The conflict comes to a head at the rehearsal dinner when one particularly bold aunt makes a comment about gold diggers and opportunistic fortune hunters, and I watch Alexander's expression turn to stone, his voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone as he defends me with a fierceness that brooks no argument, making it clear that anyone who cannot respect his choice is not welcome at our wedding. But I find my own voice rising to meet the challenge, no longer the frightened maid who needed rescuing, telling his family exactly what I think of their snobbery and their assumptions, showing the strength I have developed through everything we have survived together, and I see Alexander's pride in his eyes as I stand my ground. The wedding day arrives with nervous anticipation thrumming through my veins, and I stand in front of the mirror in a simple but beautiful dress that makes me feel like myself rather than a costume version of a bride. And when Alexander sees me walking toward him through the garden, his emotion is raw and unguarded on his face, tears gathering in his eyes as though he cannot quite believe this is real. We exchange vows we wrote ourselves, promising to protect and partner in love despite and because of our complicated beginning, acknowledging the unconventional path that brought us here. And Sophie stands between us throughout the ceremony, because this is not just a marriage, but the formal creation of the family we have already become. Alexander turns to Sophie after we exchange rings and makes vows to her as well, promising to be the father she deserves, to protect and cherish her always. And my daughter calls him daddy without hesitation, the word natural and right, and I watch this dangerous man completely undone by a child's love and trust. The reception unfolds in the gardens with a small gathering of people who truly matter, and Thomas gives a toast about the woman who tamed the untamable, and I blush while Alexander's possessive pride radiates from every line of his body as he pulls me close. We dance as the sun sets and the world narrows to just us, and I find myself reflecting on how a year ago I was terrified of this man, and now I cannot imagine life without him. And he whispers against my ear that he knew from the first time he followed me that I would change everything, and I laugh and call it stalking, and his grin is unrepentant as he agrees, but points out it worked. Night falls, and guests gradually depart until only the three of us remain, putting Sophie to bed together in a routine that has become beautifully domestic and perfect. And then Alexander and I are finally alone, our wedding night stretching before us, our future unfurling like the stars emerging overhead, hard-won and infinitely precious. 6 months after the wedding, I find myself standing at the window of what has become our bedroom, watching the sunrise paint gold across the gardens, and I reflect on the impossible journey that brought me from terrified maid to beloved wife, from desperate single mother to partner in building something meaningful, and the transformation feels both surreal and inevitable in ways I cannot fully articulate. Sophie is thriving beyond my wildest hopes, her health stable and her spirit bright as she prepares for her first day of second grade, chattering excitedly about her new teacher and the friends she has made, calling both Alexander and me mom and dad with such natural ease that sometimes I forget there was ever a time she did not have a father who adored her. Alexander has successfully transitioned most of his operations into legitimate business ventures, though I know occasional shadows of his past still surface in meetings with Thomas and in the wary respect certain men show him, but the direction we are moving is unmistakably toward the light, and I see the peace settling into his features as he sheds the weight of violence and builds something he can be proud of. I run a charitable foundation now using resources from his wealth, helping single mothers in situations like my former circumstances, providing housing assistance and medical support and job training, and the full circle nature of it fills me with purpose I never imagined finding, turning my pain into protection for others. This particular morning unfolds with comfortable domesticity as Alexander attempts to make pancakes in the kitchen, his competence with weapons and strategy not translating to cooking skills, and I laugh watching him scowl at the batter, while Sophie offers unhelpful advice from her seat at the counter. He kisses us both before leaving for a business meeting, his suit immaculate, and his demeanor that of a legitimate businessman rather than the dangerous man I first feared. And I watch him go still, sometimes amazed that this is my life, that I get to wake beside him every morning and build a future together. I find myself thinking about the night he first followed me home, the terror I felt sensing eyes on me in the darkness, and how that surveillance led inexplicably to salvation and love. And while I would never condone his methods or recommend stalking as a romantic strategy, I cannot deny the outcome brought me everything I never dared hope for. Sophie interrupts my reverie, asking why I am smiling, and I tell her the simple truth that I am happy, and she nods, as though this is the most natural thing in the world, as though happiness was always meant to be ours. Later that afternoon, I return to the mansion after visiting the foundation offices, and I find Alexander home early, waiting in the garden with an expression I cannot quite read. And when I reach him, he pulls me close and tells me he has news that makes my breath catch. He has been officially cleared of all criminal charges after years of cooperation with authorities and systematic transition away from illegal enterprises, and the weight of his past no longer hangs over us like a sword waiting to fall. We are truly free now to live without looking over our shoulders. I cry tears of relief and joy as he holds me, both of us acknowledging that we saved each other in equal measure, that neither of us would have found this peace alone. The sun begins to set as Sophie joins us in the garden, and Alexander pulls us both close as we watch our daughter playing, whole and healthy and happy, and he asks me quietly if I have any regrets about the path that brought us here. I answer with absolute honesty that I have not a single one, that I would choose this complicated, dangerous path again, knowing where it led, because it brought me here to him, to this family we have built from impossible circumstances, and he vows to spend every day proving I made the right choice, and I kiss him with a promise returned. The mansion lights glow behind us as darkness falls, no longer a place of fear, but a home filled with love, and I think how sometimes the most dangerous choice leads to the safest harbor. Sometimes the monster turns out to be the hero, and sometimes being followed leads you exactly where you needed to go.